Number 4, at least I think it's number 4. Yeah, number 4. Superpowered Love by Kirby Crackle. So, I'm a nerd, as you already know, and Kirby Crackle is one of my favorite nerd bands, nerd rock bands. I feel like a lot of their earlier stuff, E for Everybody and their self-titled one, they had a lot of stretching to do, they had a lot of musical growth that they needed to get through. I really like the diversity found on Superpowered Love, and I also like that most of them are love songs, and so I like the nerdy aspect to a lot of these, like the Superpowered Girlfriend. And I also love just a lot of the really nerdy stuff, like comic book shops. I'm not a big fan of rap, but I really like that tongue-in-cheek version of Comic Shop. I also love Bite of Another, as well as Again Maybe Not. Most of these songs, as I said, are more love themed, and Then Again Maybe Not is a really great love, or at least like an infatuation song towards the superhero who's starting to fall in love with the evil mistress. I love that album, and the musicianship on this is actually really well done. They've really grown, but if you're a nerd like me, I really highly suggest checking it out. You won't be disappointed on any of these tracks. They're great. We're coming down to the final 3. Here we go. Number 3, Babel by Mumford and Sons. I know this one comes kind of out of nowhere. There's something about this album that I cannot help but love. Every single one of these songs are huge, standout behemoths of that indie folk pop songs. I love a lot of the songs on this. Lover of the Light is just a beautiful track. It's hard not to connect with it. The interplay between the guitars, the bass, and the banjo, as well as the lead vocals, are done very, very well. The harmonizations between that is a really good, almost throwback to Flatt and Scrubs. I'm glad that it wasn't lost. I'm glad that that type of music wasn't lost and more people are starting to pick it up. I mean, I also love I Will Wait. That's another really great track, and a lot of the songs on this, again, it has that cohesive whole that I love about an album. It's an easy album just to put on and almost anybody can enjoy. It's very, very accessible, which I'm really glad about. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm able to latch on to a lot of these. I mean, if you haven't already, I highly recommend it. It's a great album, and I feel like almost anybody can at least not hate it. I can't quite say that everybody will love it, and I can't quite say that everybody will enjoy it. I would be really hard-pressed to find somebody that hates this album. All right, number 2, Port of Morrow by The Shins. The Shins, for me, have been always on my radar ever since I first watched Garden State in high school. And I mean, a friend of mine and myself, we loved Garden State when we were in high school because we're high school students. Everybody in high school loves it. And then you go to university and realize, well, it's not really that great. Zach Braff, through Natalie Portman, showed me and introduced me to The Shins. And it's because of that that I immediately ran out and I bought the Blue album. And then I also bought a couple other albums, but Port of Morrow was the first album by them that every single song was beautiful. I felt like on previous albums there were about a handful of songs, 3 to 4 songs that were really good, and then 1 or 2 that was really, really beautiful. And with Port of Morrow, every single song on that album was beautiful, and every single song on that album I connected with and I wanted to hear again, and I almost wanted to keep clicking back on my CD player because at the time I still had my CD player, and then I'm like, wait, I know that the next song is just as beautiful. So it was such a great treat, and one that I still look on pretty fondly. It's interesting that both Babel and Port of Morrow came out on the same year, because I kept going back and forth between the two. So the two almost feel linked to me. I connected just slightly more with Port of Morrow than I did with Babel, just because I really appreciate the musicianship a little bit more on Port of Morrow. I felt a little bit more heartfelt. It felt a little bit more real, whereas with Babel, it felt just a little bit marketable. It felt a little bit more in the mainstream. And I know that sounds really hipster nerdy of me or hipster indie of me, but it's true. I could almost see the corporation standing behind the boys and saying, okay, how can we best market this? How can we best fine-tune this to make it sound accessible to everybody? Even though it worked, and it worked beautifully, and that's part of the reason why I do like it, because it is so accessible. It does bring the enjoyment just a hair to Port of Morrow because it is so authentic with Port of Morrow, and so that's why I really enjoy it. Okay, so before I get to number 1, I really need to talk about some honorable mentions because this list was really hard to make for 2 reasons. The first, finding 10 albums outside of the progressive rock and the metal and the post-rock scene to talk to you guys about. But also, when I did find a list, I had about 20 albums that I really connected with, and I kept juggling. I was able to whittle it down pretty easily to about the top 15. For the last a good day and a half, I've been switching out songs between the 15 and the top 10, and for a while there I was just going to do a top 15, but I figured that would, kind of cheat a little bit. So instead I've given some honorable mentions to these next 5 albums. They're in no particular order, but I do need to talk about them and I do need to address them because they are just as important. The first one is All in Good Time by the Barenaked Ladies. So with this album, it was the first album that Stephen Page left the album. Both my best friend and I, we were really hesitant about this album because even though we really loved Ed's songs, and Ed being the other songwriter of Barenaked Ladies, we didn't know if his writing alone could make an entire album. Luckily, the keyboardist and the bass player, they were there to pick up. The album actually is one of my favorites by the band. It's much more real. It's both goofy and serious, and that is what I love about the Barenaked Ladies. They're both very serious at times and they're both very goofy at times, and I feel like All in Good Time was able to really capture on that and really present the music in that fashion. 4 Seconds is one of my favorite tracks, as well as, again, taking the flip side, The Northern Lights. Those 2 tracks are just beautiful in showcasing both of the Barenaked Ladies' ability in creating music. Shatter Me by Lindsey Sterling. So Lindsey came out of the woodworks of YouTube, and that's really where she got her start, and that's where I heard about her. I first heard about Lindsey when she dropped her Phantom of the Opera renditions, and oh boy, wow, talk about a song that A, came out of nowhere, and B, blew me away. Her rendition of the Phantom of the Opera and that medley of the Phantom of the Opera really, I listened to it at least 10 times when it first came out. She is a violinist with dubstep sprinkled throughout. And so when she put out her, I believe that was her second album of Shatter Me, I fell in love with it, and it is some of the greatest violin music mixed very well with dubstep. I do enjoy dubstep when it's done well. I feel like it's almost become very much like auto-tune in where everybody's using it, and so it's almost become a cliche at this time. But I feel like when it's done well and when it's done right in sparing doses, it is some of my favorite types of music because it embodies what I love about progressive rock. It builds up and you get a payoff, and that's what I really love about it, especially with some of those, when the bass drops type of thing. So I feel like Lindsey gets this, and I feel like she understands how to intertwine her musicianship with the violin, and she does that very well, and she makes those builds up and she gives you those pays-offs, and Shatter Me is a very beautiful album for that. And if I need something to pump me up, something to really get me going, I'll listen to that because that really helps pump me up. Moving on, The Second Law by Muse. This one was actually pretty easy to keep off the top 10, but I didn't really want to shy away from it completely. It has some of my favorite songs by Muse. The main reason why I kept it off the top 10 was right after Survival, right after the 4th track. It enters this, I don't want to say wasteland, but it enters this lull where the music becomes a little bit more subdued and unfortunately also a little bit disinteresting. And it's not until the very end of the album with The Second Law, parts 1 and 2, that it starts to pick up again. But by that point, it's a very interesting album because Supremacy, Madness, Panic Station, and Prelude with Survival are some of my favorite Muse tracks, and I love Survival. But right after Survival, it doesn't do anything for me. So that's why I didn't quite include it within my top 10. Another one that I need to address is, of course, 1989 by Taylor Swift. If you might know that I'm a huge fan of Taylor Swift in her music style, in her persona, in her stage presence, in just everything that she's done for the music industry. I can't help but love. She's nothing but a good influence. So I like the fact that she's so genuine in that. And characters aside, there's a lot of characters in the music industry that I like that I just don't connect with their music. And luckily I do connect with Taylor Swift's music, oddly enough. And I can listen to 1989 quite a bit and still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I I love Shake It Off. I'm not gonna lie. I love Shake It Off. I love Blank Space. The song that I'm a little disappointed that they didn't do more of, and I wish she does a music video for this one, is the I Know Places. I love that song, and I wish that more people would listen to it because it's such a great song. It really balances her genuosity, is that a word? Her genuineness with her musical talents and is able to present it in a very subdued way, so I really enjoyed that one. Finally, the last one that I need to call out is Primus and the Chocolate Factory with the Fungi Ensemble, of course by Primus. My friend actually took me to see Primus a couple months ago, and they performed this album, and I have not been able to stop listening to this album. I cannot get enough of this. It was single-handedly the strangest show I've ever been to. And this is one of the strangest albums I've ever listened to. And if you know Primus, that's pretty much what you get with most of their albums. It is strange. But I love that all of these songs are renditions of the classic Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. All of the songs are seen through the Primus lens. It is such a treat to listen to all of these songs with that Primus lens. It's one of the most groovy albums that I've heard within the past 10 years. And so those were the honorable mentions. So let's dive right into the number one album released between 2010 and 2014 that were not progressive rock, metal, or any kind of that prog progressive movement. And that is The Reflector by Arcade Fire. So with Arcade Fire, I first heard about them back again when I was in high school. One of my buddies was trying to get me into the modern music of the time. He felt like I was spending too much time in the 70s and 60s, and he was just like, dude, there's a lot of good music getting put out today, and you really need to support these artists because they are phenomenal and they're getting outshined by a lot of the past, and you really need to listen to it. So he gave me Funeral by Arcade Fire, the 2003 album by them, the first full-length album, and I was hooked. I could not believe some of the sounds that I was hearing on that album, and I became an instant fan of Arcade Fire, like I'm sure a lot of people did. So coming into The Reflector with those albums in mind, I figured, okay, so I really loved Funeral, and I liked Neon Bible, and I loved a few of their songs, but overall I felt it was a little bit of a disappointment. And with The Suburbs, I felt even more that it was a disappointment. I didn't connect with the songs as much, and so I figured with The Reflector, it was just going to be a continuation of that. Each one, for me, I was feeling more and more isolated from the band. I wasn't quite connecting with them, so I was just, again, I was figuring, okay, I'm not going to connect with this that much, but I love the band, I gotta support them. So opening day, I went out and I bought the album. I was blown away. The album, The Reflector, every single song on that album is a masterpiece, and that's really hard for me to say, but I will stand with that. Even those songs that people are a little bit on the fence with, like Joan of Arc, Porno, and a couple of the songs on the second side, they didn't quite connect with quite as much, but I feel like it's just a beautiful album from start to finish. I mean, the title track of The Reflector, I was blown away. It was a fresh new take on music that I haven't heard, and that's really hard to do, especially at this day and age. Presenting music in a way that you haven't heard before, that is so hard to do. And I really love the fact that they were able to do this. And I love the presentation of this album. It almost reminds me of like a cassette tape, because right at that midpoint you hear that do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And when I had tapes growing up, that midpoint had that test scale. I love that midpoint of an album. And giving me that midpoint gave me something to really latch onto and really help me enjoy the album. Just the harmonizations as well, and also the duality of the band. I mean, there's that really great theme running through the album of that reflector, that reflection, right? And look no further than the supersymmetry, where you can pretty much play the song twice in mirror image and get a beautiful new track. Yeah, I could go on forever, but I'm just gushing at this time. Wrapping this all up, those are my top 10, arguably top 15 albums that I love and I will continue to listen to that are outside of the metal and outside of the progressive rock scene. So what did you guys think of it? What are some albums outside of your domain that you really enjoy? Let me know, comments below. And also, if you feel like I missed an album, let me know, because I probably haven't heard of it yet. Let me know those albums down below so I can have a listen to, because I'm always on the lookout for new stuff. So thank you so much for watching. I know this is a really long one. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching all the way through. That's about it. All right, note out.